Hello, everyone. My name is Melinda Zalma, Tanenbaum's Manager of Programs. I am delighted to welcome you to Tanenbaum's Religious Diversity Leadership Summit and today's final session, a learning lab with Tanenbaum CEO, the Reverend Mark Fowler. I begin with the land acknowledgement, an intentional naming of the space in which we live and work. Land acknowledgement is a step toward fully hearing and honoring Indigenous peoples' history and culture and repairing the damage done through colonization. You're tuning in from New York City, where Tanenbaum's offices are located, and where I myself live. We are on the ancestral land of the Munsee Lenape Nation. We pay respect to elders past and present who care for this region. We'll put a link in the chat so you can identify the Indigenous connection of where you are, noting that this relationship and website are not only limited to the United States. Please feel free to share where you are joining us from, and make sure that your chat is set to share both panelists and attendees. Thank you to our sponsors for their valuable support. Our summit sponsor, the Walt Disney Company, has been part of our membership program for over 6 years and is one of our corporate leaders. They have regularly sponsored this event, and we are grateful for their generosity, continued support, and partnership in religious diversity. Today's session is also brought to you by Microsoft, one of our newest corporate partners. With a truly global footprint, it continues to be a privilege to partner with Microsoft as they do the work of addressing religious diversity and inclusion. I'm pleased to share this personalized message from Microsoft Chief Diversity Officer, Lindsay Ray McIntyre.
Hello, everyone. I am super excited to be able to come to you today on behalf of Microsoft. I'm Lindsay Ray McIntyre, the Chief Diversity Officer, and I'm really looking forward to this important conversation in the Learning Lab and the broader conversations that we are going to have in partnership with Tanenbaum. One of the most important pieces of our diversity and inclusion work at Microsoft is guided by our commitment to a growth mindset, which is the cornerstone for our cultural transformation more broadly. And as I think about the enormous amount of work that we need to do in the workplace around faith, I can think of no better set of skills and mindsets as a growth mindset to take us where we want to go collectively. I know that we at Microsoft are aspirational in how we continue to broaden the aperture on diversity and inclusion, including more sophisticated and nuanced conversations on faith in the workplace around the world. And I am looking forward to us being on a learning journey with other corporate partners and with the guidance and inspiration of Reverend Mark Fowler and the team at Tanenbaum. Have an amazing conference.
And now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Tanenbaum CEO, Mark Fowler.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Melinda. And thank you all for joining us. It is an amazing opportunity to be with you, even in this way, to be with us for our last session to close out our 5th annual Religious Diversity Leadership Summit. I'm looking forward to the day, and I'm also looking forward to the work ahead. And thank you all for your partnership thus far. To start with, I'd like to just kind of take you back a little bit, if I can, to a few months ago when we were planning the summit. And we spent a lot of time thinking about the theme for this year's summit. And we wanted to continue the momentum from our last gathering in 2019, where our theme was innovating religious diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And at that conference, we introduced you to the idea that litigation avoidance and basic policies around religious inclusion in the workplace were the beginning of the path toward innovating around religious diversity, inclusion, and belonging in the workplace. We also introduced you to this idea that there were 4 actions that would define innovation as we think about it in terms of religious diversity. And 4 legs of the table, if you will. And that by attending to those 4 tables and noting the ways in which they intersect with one another, that there would be a result in workplaces, workforces, and marketplaces where people of all religious beliefs and none would know themselves as respected in the workplace. Those four actions are the ones that you see on the screen: compliance, assessment, initiative, and innovation. And so when we come to this year's theme of do the work, build a bigger table, we want to pick up on those ideas of initiative and innovation as we look at the imperative of religious inclusion and belonging at work today. We've had some amazing speakers and panels over the course of this conference. We heard from our keynote speaker, Sarah Eaglehart, the co-CEO and co-founder of Return to the Heart Foundation, of the impact of shared platforms and shared priorities when it comes to thinking about inclusion. That being included in the Black Lives Matters movement gave a voice and a platform to centuries of concerns of Native people. And I remember Sarah speaking specifically of it being such a welcome invitation to participate. Sarah also shared with us that there were 4 levels of oppression and change, and that those dynamics go together, that there was a personal level, an interpersonal level, an institutional level, and a cultural level of addressing oppression and change within any environment. And if we think of our companies as ecosystems of individuals forming a collective, rather just as individuals or even groups of individuals, in order for us to really consider how to build a bigger table, we have to acknowledge and address the ways in which we are not welcoming or inclusive to all at each of these levels. So I just want to thank you, Sarah, for sharing your wisdom with us. In our session on purposeful conversations, you had the opportunity to hear from some of Tanenbaum's peacemakers in action. The work of Imam Ashafa and Pastor James, now Muslim and Christian brothers in Nigeria, they shared about the needs to intentionally diversify and include all in the peace building and reconciliation process in Nigeria. And by doing that, that has led to a great deal of success in the peace building work that they do. We also heard from Reverend Jackie Manapudi of Indonesia, who shared with us the importance of multiple stakeholders across any conflicts and multiple multilateral engagement around conflict, and that everyone has to be at the table in order to bring about a positive peace. I was particularly moved by the Women of Faith and Belief in the Workplace session, noting the impact of covering, hiding, even denying one's religious affiliation that can happen for women and others around their faith beliefs, and the courage that it took for all of our panelists in their journeys to fully incorporate their religious and spiritual beliefs with their journey in the workplace. And finally, last week, the data that was shared with us from the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life shows us that both government restrictions on the practice of religion and social hostilities exhibited by individuals and groups on religious beliefs globally are trends that we have to follow, but that will definitely have an impact on the global workforce to come. And that brings us to today. So at Tanenbaum, we've been saying for a few years that addressing religious diversity, inclusion, and belonging is no longer a matter of if you're going to do it, but how you're going to address these things and when. And in 2019, Tanenbaum began a partnership with the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation, where we jointly launched the Corporate Religious Diversity Assessment, or the CRDA. And the CRDA is a maturity model by which companies can privately and internally assess their strategy and their readiness for creating a religiously inclusive workplace. The CRDA is built on the UN Declaration of Human Rights and uses language from the UN Declaration of Human Rights around the right, and I'll just read it here as you see it on the screen, that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change their religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others and in public or private to manifest their religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. And this forms the foundation of the corporate pledge that the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation created. Tanenbaum actually took the pledge in the spirit of this Declaration of Human Rights and created the CRDA as a 4-concept model for self-evaluating a company's readiness and strategies around addressing religious diversity, inclusion, and belonging on a global level. I want to focus today, though, on concepts 3 and 4, which look at a particular way in which a company would be attending to religious diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So in concept 3, you see on the screen that we're looking in this concept for the criteria for demonstrating commitment to the freedom of religion or belief. And again, remember, this is in the context of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And in particular, in these concepts, we look at and ask companies to self-evaluate, how are you promoting the freedom of religion or belief through public statements? And are you including the freedom of religion or belief benchmark in annual or public reports? So imagine if you have an annual report and you have a section that lays out the efforts that you're engaging in around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Do you have any mention there of the ways in which you are supporting and advancing or demonstrating a commitment to the freedom for people to believe and to worship as they will? In concept 3, we actually look at a further dimension. I'm sorry, in concept 4, we can go on to the next slide. In concept 4, we actually look at even a deeper dimension, that are you as a company protecting and promoting the freedom of religion or belief in communities with partners? And we ask if you are in collaboration, for instance, with local organizations committed to or interested in the protection and promotion of the freedom of religion or belief. Are you able to speak out against local efforts that would restrict the freedom of religion and belief for your employees or for the communities in which you're working? And are you prioritizing business partners, suppliers, and contractors who support the values of the freedom of religion or belief? And we recognize that this may be new, but it's not completely unheard of, if you will. That if you think about your supply chain and you think about, for instance, the ways that you may be looking to ensure that child labor is nowhere within your supply chain, could you also be looking to see, are there people in our supply chain that may be discriminating against either their employees or their workers or generally in society around people's freedom of religion or belief? So where the CRDA asks you to consider the ways in which your corporate social responsibility and or your ESG mission is actually rooted toward and looking at the ways in which you can, as an entity, support these efforts. So what we wanted to do was to give you an opportunity in breakout groups to actually just begin to imagine, begin to kind of knock around the idea that if we were going to address the freedom of religion and belief, and there are a number of criteria within the CRDA, but we're focusing in on one. So we're going to ask you in your groups to please discuss what steps would be necessary for your company to be able to incorporate the freedom of religion or belief in your statement of values, in your CSR or ESG mission, and in any public statements you imagine making about religious belief. And I know that there are probably a lot of things that you could speak to about what the concerns are. And I just want to share a quick story with you before we go into breakout groups. Some of you may know that many years ago, I had a catering business. And on one occasion, I had an order to do, and the person who was supposed to help me deliver that order just did not show up. And I had no idea where they were. And I had an order that I had to prepare for somewhere between 50 or 75 people. And I was freaking out, like I was at the kitchen trying to figure out how am I going to get all of this done. And I called a friend of mine who gave me this advice, which I carried with me since. She said, the only two questions you need to ask yourself right now is what's missing and how can I? What's missing and how can I? So as you go into breakout groups to look at the ways in which your company might incorporate into either your statement of values, your CSR or ESG mission, or any public statements that you might make around making around the freedom of religion or belief, I'm going to ask you just to identify at least 3 action steps that would need to take place in order for you to do this. We're also going to ask if, when you come back, what challenges there might be, and what are some ways that you think that you might be able to move through those challenges. So in terms of logistics, we've dropped into the chat a link that will automatically take you to a Zoom meeting. We were currently in a webinar. We're now moving into a Zoom meeting where we'll be able to go into breakout groups. And a member of our production team is standing by so that we make sure that you get taken care of, and we'll be able to split you into breakout groups. So I believe that that information is in the chat now. If you would click on that link, that will take us into the Zoom meeting. We will immediately go into breakout groups. You'll have 15 minutes to talk with your colleagues, and then we'll come back together and then just share some of the conversation that you've had thus far.
And here ends our recording for the session, from which point we went into breakout rooms for further discussion and brainstorming of what comes next. Thank you all for tuning into this recording to revisit our 2021 Religious Diversity Leadership Summit. If you're watching this before autumn of 2021, I invite you to save the date for our October programming, Business in the 21st Century, Exploring the Economy of Communion, EOC, from a religiously diverse lens, in collaboration with Fordham University School of Law's Institute of Law, Religion, and Lawyers' Work. The EOC puts forth a theoretical framework for how business can be conducted. For example, rather than a company solely thinking about corporate social responsibility from the perspective of giving its excess back to communities, the EOC envisions an economic model where everyone is included and no one is left behind as fundamental to how a company operates, functions, and fulfills on its purpose in the world. We'll hold Tuesday sessions beginning on October 5th through October 26th at 12 p.m. Eastern. While we are hard at work at finalizing additional speakers, we are thrilled to share that our opening session will feature a renowned economist, Jeffrey Sachs, and Luigi Bruni, who will lay the groundwork for the rest of the conference. On behalf of all of us at Tanenbaum, thank you for tuning in.